Hello everyone, Bobby here once again, and today I wanted to share with you another dashboard presentation I decided to put together. This is made using IBM Cognos Analytics, version 11.1, and I believe this is the 5th release. Now let's just get right into this. I decided to take some data I found, which talks about or explains life expectancy and it had tons of metrics I could have gone with. But I decided to go a little more base level. I didn't want to get too intricate into deep statistics for this one. I just wanted to make some more base level comparisons between developing nations and developed nations. So this is data taken from the years in between 2000 and 2015 for life expectancy in these nations. So I decided to group some together. So on the left vertical side, you'll see developing nations in blue and their statistics, and on the right, the same charts, but with developed nations in green. So let's start off with developing nations on the left column. So here you can see I decided to create some maps, and these are just basically showing by color intensity higher. So basically, the deeper the color, the higher the average life expectancy of citizens within their nation. So let's say we took China, for example. Life expectancy is 74.3. And if we compare it with a nation with a color much lighter, like let's go with Madagascar, for example. 63.4, significantly lower, right? I mean, that's about what? About 11 years difference. That's quite a bit. Now, if we go down, I decided to throw in some key indicators just to show you the numbers straight away for the three main metrics I was interested in. So life expectancy, as we talked about, and this is the average between all developing nations. So this is 68.7 years, you can see. And of course, you can filter however you'd like. 17.1% adult mortality rate. So it took me a second to actually figure out at first when I was looking at the data what the statistic was actually measuring, because I thought mortality, okay, that must mean the more adults living past into their senior age, which is actually the opposite. It wouldn't make sense if it was that low. It's actually the opposite. So what they did was it is the average out of 1,000 members of a population that are dying between the ages of 15 to 60. So you can see it's actually much higher in developing nations. It's 17.1% here overall, as compared to with your developed nations. It's actually significantly lower. It's almost split in half. That's a pretty huge, significant difference to look at. Now, average schooling I was also interested in, so I wanted to see some differences there. Again, much higher in developed nations. So these numbers kind of hit you in the face almost with how significant differences are. With only 11.7 compared here on the average. 15.6 with your developed first world nations. Much higher life expectancy as well. That's about a 10 plus year difference. Now let's go down. I decided to create some scatter plots. And what these are going to compare is the average schooling years members of the population have in their lifetime on the x-axis. Then on the y-axis, we decided to go with life expectancy on their average life expectancy. So here, you can see there's actually much more developing nations in general being grouped in the left side. So and you can see the average really between these two is right in here. If you were to zoom in, let's take a few nations. For example, what are they? St. Lucia, Turkey, Ecuador. Interesting to look at. So you can see they're running about in the average of about 13, in between 12 to 13 schooling years, the 70 to 75 year range. Now, there's much less on the developed nation side. There's much less dots. So you could see, for example, just how big a difference there is in schooling just by looking at the x-axis in general. The scale starts at 2 down here. And there's countries with averages as low as 5 in that range. But then there's nothing below, what looks here is nothing below 13 years average, just to give you a gauge of how different those are between these nations. You can see a little more spread apart, but in general, there's just a lot more average schooling in these developed nations going on. You can see here, again, scale of the y-axis starts at 45 here, starts at 70. I mean, the lowest here is Lithuania average, 72.81. Lowest, if we just drop down here, look at something low, 49. That's actually that's very low, as I'm sure you know. So the next charts I decided to go with, there's some word cloud charts. I found these interesting, so I wanted to try to utilize them here. So basically, adult mortality, as we talked about, it's the inverse of intuitively what we think. So the more significant these words are, the bigger they are, that means the lower the mortality rates, right? So more on average dying between the ages of 15 and 60. So we can see South Africa is sticking out a bit here. Zimbabwe, Botswana, interesting to look at. And if we want to look here, of course, there's much less words in general, or nations listed, of course. Romania sticks out. Bulgaria, Slovakia, Latvia, Luxembourg, Poland. Interesting here, the United States is actually very hard to see, which means the mortality rates are probably very good. Yeah, I can't even see that in here. That's interesting. All right, so predicting factors of life expectancy. These are among my favorites to use because what it essentially does is these use artificial intelligence to figure out predicting factors. So let's say we took a target for this. I selected the target as life expectancy. What are the predicting factors and how are they different between developing nations and developed? So we took developing first. Target life expectancy, strong predicting factors are the combination of adult mortality, HIV/AIDS deaths, thinness between the ages of 5 to 9, income, composition of resources, and schooling as a predictor. That's very interesting. Now, especially with something such as HIV/AIDS deaths, that's probably, I would imagine, not so much an issue in these developed countries, and it's not. So you can see predictive strengths comes down to more just 2 factors: income composition and thinness between 1 to 19 years. That's very interesting to look at, actually. There's much more coming into play with how life expectancy is being determined. And so that does it for this presentation, and I'd like to thank you for listening once again, and until next time, thank you.